Earlier in the year, I organized a disability simulation as my anti-bias project and my senior project. And for that, I asked people to use a manual wheelchair for an entire school day. And we got around 15 volunteers to do it. And the following videos or interviews are students reacting to the simulation and what it was like to be in a wheelchair.
Yeah, I took the simulation seriously in general.
I thought I took the simulation pretty seriously. There were a few times where I messed around, but for the most part I tried to, really accurately represent what it would be like being in a wheelchair.
Yeah, I took it as seriously as I could.
I did take the simulation seriously in general.
I took the simulation seriously, but I think that when I was outside with my friends, we may have goofed around a little bit. And I think that people who are in wheelchairs probably do take themselves seriously when they are in wheelchairs.
I took the simulation seriously.
Yeah, sometimes I didn't take it seriously because, one, I had my legs taped together. Two, there were a lot of people not taking me as seriously. So I guess I didn't take myself seriously.
Yeah. I think that maybe some of the people that were doing the experiment might have goofed around a little bit too hard.
There were times where I didn't take the simulation completely serious.
No, I don't really think people in wheelchairs have fun in wheelchairs. I think they just live their normal lives in wheelchairs, but I guess they sometimes have fun.
I imagine that people in wheelchairs take it also seriously because that's the situation that they're in, and maybe people joke around about it, but I really doubt that that's a thing that people do.
I guess what I learned from the simulation is that people in wheelchairs, of course, can't have fun all the time with them because they pose real challenges in everyday life, but I'm sure it's possible to have fun with them, of course.
I think people in wheelchairs occasionally have fun and sometimes don't take themselves seriously. It all depends on their personality.
I think the hardest thing for me while being in a wheelchair is opening up pull doors with, if you can pull them, and trying to go upstairs and downstairs.
A lot of things were a lot harder in the chair, mostly just getting around and interacting with people. It was really hard to get from one class to the other, and there were a lot of times where I would try and get to a space to sit down in or whatever, and it would be really tricky to maneuver my way in there.
I'd say pretty much everything was harder in the wheelchair. Getting around, I felt like I was always in people's way. I was getting stuck all the time, trying to get in and out of classrooms. In the cafeteria especially as well. I just felt really vulnerable. I took probably the hardest pee of my life. But at the same time, it was really nice being vulnerable like that in school because my peers had my back and people were watching out for me in the hallways and helping me to do what I needed to do. So it was nice in that way, and it was almost like a bonding experience for me.
Not much was harder in the chair, but it was harder to switch into a seat.
Things were harder in the chair to get around and get into classrooms and get to desks and tables.
A lot of things were harder in the chair. I had a lot of trouble opening doors.
I didn't get treated that much differently in a wheelchair, except for the sometimes people joking around.
I don't know if I physically was treated a lot worse in the wheelchair. I think people were, for the most part, respectful about it and, treated me about the same as they would if I wasn't in the wheelchair. But I did notice that a lot more people were certainly looking at me and kind of giving me odd looks and kind of wondering why I was in the wheelchair and what the situation was. And part of that might just be that it was a simulation. I'm not normally in a wheelchair, but I also certainly felt like people were perceiving me differently because I was in the wheelchair.
So yeah, I did get treated differently in the wheelchair, only in the way that people would kind of like usher others out of the way when I was coming through.
I wasn't really treated differently in the chair, except for people would look down at me because they were higher than me.
I think that when I was in the chair, I got treated differently because people thought that I needed more help with things that I could do, and it seemed like when I needed help, everyone was just there immediately.
I got treated pretty differently in the chair. Like, everyone was willing to help me, and even if I didn't ask, they would like hold the door open or something.
I never really felt isolated in a wheelchair, mainly because during the simulation other people were in wheelchairs.
I don't know if I really felt isolated during the simulation, but I felt like if I was permanently in a wheelchair, that's certainly something that could happen.
I definitely felt isolated coming through because most of the attention I got was people trying to get out of my way.
I never felt isolated.
I didn't really ever feel isolated too much.
I didn't really feel isolated because all my friends were like really willing to help out.
If I was in a wheelchair permanently, then that might just alter my dancing abilities.
If I were in a chair permanently, life would certainly be a lot harder.
If I was in the chair permanently, I'm sure basically everything would be harder, even if I got the technique down and things got easier. I mean, I can't even really imagine that.
I think it would be awful to be in a chair permanently for me because soccer is a large part of my life and I couldn't do that in a wheelchair.
If I were permanently in the chair, I think it would be really difficult and I'd have to adapt a lot to and like learn how to do different stuff.
So in this video you saw students talking about using a wheelchair for a day to see what it was like to have a mobility disability. And you can see that they learned that it wasn't as easy to be in a wheelchair as it was not to be in a wheelchair.